Okay, well, let's get started. First of all, hello and welcome to Wyoming's Community Navigator Program webinar. We are so glad that you have joined us today. I am Mandy Bailey, and I work with the Wyoming Community Navigator Program as the Education and Advising Director. I'll be your facilitator today. I'll be working behind the scenes to assist you the best I can with any technical difficulties that may arise, which hopefully there are none. You might want to monitor the chat today. We'll be posting helpful links and information in the chat. This webinar is being recorded, and a link will be sent out about a day after its conclusion, so you can rewatch it if you decide to do so. The Wyoming Community Navigator Program is funded by the U.S. Small Business Administration and utilizes the Wyoming Entrepreneurial Support Network to reduce barriers all small businesses face, including those owned by groups such as veterans, women, and those from rural communities and communities of color. The Wyoming Community Navigator Program uses a hub and spoke model to pursue its goals. Through their collective efforts, the hub and spoke provide training, mentorship, access to capital, and access to other resources to help business owners build resiliency and ultimately be the driving force behind Wyoming's economic growth. Today's presentation, Bootstrapping Your Small Business, is presented to us by Bridget Manley. Bridget is an e-learning specialist with a passion for helping learners become effective agents in their career and in their communities. She co-founded Ascendant Design and Training in July of 2020. Before that, she was the curriculum manager for a Denver-based startup company where she developed compliance and manufacturing training for the state legal cannabis industry. So without further ado, let's hear from Bridget.
All right, well, thank you, Mandy. I appreciate that amazing introduction. And I'm happy to be here with you today to talk about bootstrapping your business. We'll talk a little bit about what bootstrapping is and is not in this context. And then we'll also give you some tips for deciding whether or not bootstrapping is a good choice for you. And if so, some resources and strategies you can use to make it successful. Next slide, please. So just a little bit more about me. I am a learning experience designer, which is a fancy way of saying that I help develop learning experiences for adults, primarily in business settings. So I'm also head of the services department. So I work with our clients, which are mostly companies, to develop custom training solutions to help people do their jobs better. I'm an e-learning designer, which means I make the tools to help people learn on the job. And I'm also an adult learning consultant. And in that role, I draw on my background in journalism as well as education to help companies develop effective learning solutions. My business partner and spouse and partner in crime, Daniel Patterson, couldn't make it today, but he's an integral part of the company as well. He's vice president as well as, and he's also chief technical officer, and he's head of the products division. So he develops e-learning products and tools for people like me, so we can develop more effective learning solutions. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about what you'll do and what you'll learn today. We're going to start by defining what bootstrapping is, what it means, and what it doesn't mean in this particular business context. After that, you'll get to weigh the pros and cons of bootstrapping and explore some questions that will help you understand if bootstrapping is a good choice for you and your business. We'll also explore some resources and strategies that will support your self-funded business venture. So throughout all of this, we really encourage you to jump into the chat and share your thoughts as we go. Feel free to drop in questions, comments, thoughts. We'll also pause throughout the webinars. And during those pauses, feel free to unmute your microphone to, again, ask questions, share ideas. I think everybody will get more value from this if it's more of a conversation rather than me just lecturing you for 45 minutes. So again, feel free to engage in whatever way feels most comfortable to you. We just ask that when you're not speaking to go ahead and mute your microphone just so we don't get any background noise. Next slide, please. So with that, we'll start with a discussion question. Go ahead and just kind of introduce yourself. Tell us what type of business you currently own or hope to own. And what brings you here today? What about bootstrapping caught your attention? And what would you like to learn? Again, go ahead and drop that in the chat if you'd like, or feel free to unmute if you'd like to engage that way. I'll give you just a second to think about that. So while we're waiting for those responses to roll in, just a little bit of background about myself. I've been bootstrapping since 2016. So that's what, 6 years now, I guess. I've done all different kinds of stuff. I've been an ESL tutor online. I've done freelance writing, freelance reporting. And then from that, I kind of fell into instructional design. So I've been doing this for a while. My husband, Daniel, has been started several self-funded ventures. So between the two of us, we've had quite a lot of experience with bootstrapping.
The chat function wasn't working for a second, but if you didn't get it, it should be working now.
Okay, cool. Cool. Yeah. So feel free to, drop in the chat. What kind of business do you own or hope to own? And what brings you here today? And while you're doing that, we'll go ahead. We'll keep going, but we'll come back to the chat in just a few moments to respond to those. So let's do the next slide, please. Thank you.
It looks like we do have one. We have a Jackson Hole mobile massage, and here just to learn a little bit.
Okay, cool. Cool. Well, thanks for joining us today. Hopefully this will be helpful for you. Okay. Oh, okay. And I see Kai. I'm a student. I have a web design business. Cool. Excellent. Yeah, I think a lot of the bootstrapping principles we'll talk about today will fit really well with web design. Anything that's kind of more digital based that doesn't require a lot of upfront investment is a really good, I'm like a really good option for bootstrapping. I see Amanda. I'm here with a student who's interested in being in fashion design. Hey, that sounds like fun. Cool. Okay. Yeah. Again, I mean, I don't know much about fashion design. I can barely, get my clothes to coordinate some days, but that sounds like a really cool industry. Yeah. And I think this might be a good, I'm like a good option as well. Cool. All right. And I apologize if I'm kind of on a delay. Sometimes it takes a little bit for the comments to show up. So apologize if I'm a few beats behind, but it'll all be good. So, okay, I'm going to keep going, but I will come back to those as those roll in. So thanks again for engaging and kind of introducing yourself today. Okay, so let's talk about what bootstrapping is. We're going to start by explaining what it is not. Let's see. Yeah, thank you. Bootstrapping is not starting a business without any outside assistance. I think that there's sometimes, the unhelpful myth that, people are self-made people and they start in business, like without any help. And we know that that's not really true. Even the most successful business owners who seem to have self-propelled themselves have always had some kind of resource or people behind them supporting them throughout the way. So I don't want to perpetuate that and just say, if you can't do it on your own, then you're a failure, because that is not true at all. Kind of what we're talking about in this particular context, bootstrapping is kind of more of a financial concept. It's basically, shorthand for a self-funded business venture. So basically, you're just taking whatever resources that you have, and you're using it to put into your business rather than seeking outside investment or outside resources, either from a business loan or from an investor. So again, this is more of a financial term rather than a, do it all yourself kind of term. Next slide, please. Okay, so now that we know what bootstrapping is in this context, let's talk about why you might want to consider it. It's typical and kind of more traditional for business owners to seek some sort of initial funding. Again, whether that's through investors or whether that's through a loan. And there's nothing wrong with that particular approach. As we'll see in just a moment, there are some business models where that's probably preferable. But bootstrapping can be a viable alternative simply because it gives you a little bit more power and freedom in how you run your business. When I think about, getting funding for a business or taking out a loan, I always think of the phrase popularized by the science fiction writer Robert Heinlein, TONSTOFL, and that's a long acronym for the phrase, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. And I think it's important to keep that in mind when you're, looking at potentially seeking outside investment, just because money in any kind of form usually doesn't come without some kinds of strings attached. For instance, on the next bullet, debt can sometimes fragilize your business or even your future, simply because when you take out a loan, you are then committed to paying off that loan in certain predetermined chunks. And if everything doesn't work just perfectly, or if the markets go nuts, or if there's a recession, or all kinds of things that can happen, that can, be a potential risk, at that point. In the next bullet, on the other side, with outside investment, when you get investment from investors or, someone who's just willing to, give you money to start your business, you also are inviting outside influence into your business as well. In the worst case, I've heard of this happening where sometimes you start a business and you get investors, and the investors might relegate you to a rather, relatively minor role because they want to have control over the business and they want to see the business do a certain thing. So you end up losing control over your business, and you may not actually be able to do the thing that you started the business to do. So those are two important things to keep in mind when you're thinking about whether to bootstrap versus whether to get outside investment. Again, that's not to say that outside investment is bad. It's just important to keep in mind that there are certain strings attached and that bootstrapping might be a viable alternative. So I'm just going to see if we have anything else in the chat. Doesn't look like it. Any questions or thoughts so far? Feel free to drop them in the chat or unmute if you're comfortable with that. Okay, let's go ahead and do the next slide, please. So now we're going to compare the pros and cons of bootstrapping, starting with the cons. Here are some of the downsides you might want to consider. The first one is that bootstrapping can limit the types of businesses that you can start. There are simply some business models that don't really work well for bootstrapping unless you are truly independently wealthy. So for instance, let's say you wanted to start like a bakery and have like a dine-in bakery with nice cabinets and nice industrial kitchen and all of that. Unless you have a couple, $1 million or so to invest in like a building and equipment and things like that, that might not be a viable option for bootstrapping, simply because it will require a huge upfront investment. Now, as we'll see in just a few slides later, there are some ways that you can get around that and still basically do that, or start small in that particular context. But if you want to do the whole shebang and have a storefront and have employees, bootstrapping might not be the best solution for that. So when you're thinking about bootstrapping, you might want to think about how much initial investment does this business model take, and do I have those resources? The second thing to keep in mind is that bootstrapping requires a lot of sweat equity. It's kind of a trade-off, right? If you're not pouring a lot of money into the business initially, you're pouring a lot of other resources, which will typically be your personal time and effort. This is, it kind of depends on your particular tolerance and how much time and availability you have. For some people, they have no problem, doing a side hustle initially, and then building it into a business. But you may not have those time, or you may not have that time or those resources available. So that's something to consider as well. The third consideration is that bootstrapping a business takes a lot of time. And when you're, again, just, building it with your own resources, it'll often take time for that business to grow to the point where it can actually support you, support your family, and actually start paying for itself in some ways. The final thing you might want to consider, possible downside, is that you have to wear all the hats in the business, at least initially. And this is what we're doing right now. We're doing all of our own accounting and marketing and product development and client management and project management all in-house. Now, if you're the kind of person who doesn't like doing all the things, bootstrapping might be kind of a heavy lift. For me personally, I love doing all the things. I love being able to, get my hands in every single pot and know how everything's working. So for me, it's kind of more of a feature than it is a bug. Um, Additionally, if you start your business as a bootstrap venture and then eventually grow, because you've worn all the hats, at least to start, you have a very good understanding of how your business works. And that can be a real asset as you start scaling and hiring people. It'll give you a big advantage over maybe companies that started out big, but no one person really knows how the whole business works. Okay, next slide, please. So with the disadvantages out of the way, let's talk briefly about some of the advantages of bootstrapping. I think the most important advantage is that it allows you to start and scale a business at your own pace. And this is really important because it prevents a factor known as premature scaling. And this is when a business grows too fast, too soon. There was a recent report from a group called Startup Genome Project that found that premature scaling was the primary reason why startups fail. And again, startups are a little bit different than, say just like a small business, just because startups are designed to start small and then grow really big, really fast. But I think the same model applies to any kind of business. I'm sure we all have probably experiences or horror stories of companies that grew, companies that grew too quickly and the wheels started coming off the bus, right? You have too much stuff going on, things are changing too quickly. You can't get, you can't get products out in time, or services start to suffer in quality. When you're bootstrapping, there's basically a built-in cap on how quickly you can grow, which might seem kind of more kind of like a disadvantage, but it's actually more of an advantage than anything else when you look at it that way. The next thing to keep in mind, or the next point, is that when you bootstrap, you retain control over the entire business. So say, unlike when you're getting help from investors, you don't have to worry about somebody coming in and saying, I actually paid for this, so I want it done this way, right? You have complete control over the business, and you can make sure that the business services the specific clients you want, and more importantly, adds the kind of value into the world that you want to see. The third thing to keep in mind is that bootstrapping helps you avoid debt. Especially right now with the volatility in all the markets and people worrying about a recession, not having a lot of business debt could actually be a huge asset. No matter what happens in the future, you're basically taking on a little less risk, which ultimately gives you more options and more flexibility going forward, no matter what happens. The third or fourth thing to keep in mind is that bootstrapping is something along the lines of a small reversible bet. And I mentioned this, I believe it was on our last webinar. But this idea comes from a book I read called The Startup Review. It was written, I believe, by one of the co-founders of LinkedIn. And the idea of a small reversible bet is that instead of, putting it all on the line and, risking everything to start a business, you do the opposite. And you just do one small thing, you see how it works. And if it works, you keep building on it. If it doesn't, you back up and you reconsider. Now, as you can imagine, starting any kind of business isn't necessarily a small bet, and it's not exactly completely reversible, but it is a lot more small and reversible than, say, getting a business loan or getting money, or getting money from investors. So if the worst happens and your business idea doesn't take off, the product isn't really getting the clients you thought it was, anything like that, you still have the option to to take a step back and reassess. You have that option where you wouldn't really have that option if you were, saddled with a business loan or if you were taking money from investors. The final thing to consider is that bootstrapping gives you the opportunity to learn about all parts of the business you're running. And this for me is the most fun part. This is the reason why I love bootstrapping a business, is because it's basically the poor man's MBA. You have to learn it all, the accounting, the marketing, all the things. And of course, that's a lot of work, but it also makes you more successful as a business owner overall. And I mean, if the kind of person like me who just likes to jump in and figure it out, it's a lot of fun. So again, it kind of depends on your personality and the kind and basically like the level of risk that you're willing to take or the level of learning you're willing to take on. But it really gives you a really good initial introduction into how business works. And keep in mind, like not every business idea will be successful, and that's okay. But if you're bootstrapping and you're learning about all these things, you can take anything that you've learned and leverage it to something else. So for an example, my first business venture together with my husband, Daniel, was a small business called Cinnamon App. And it was basically the idea of I would bake cinnamon rolls and he would create an app that people could order them through. It's like Uber, but for cinnamon rolls. We never sold a single cinnamon roll. We never saw a penny. But from that, because we were bootstrapping it, I learned about how to make a spreadsheet for tracking expenses. I learned how to make a basic web page in Google, I don't know, Google Sites, just all these things that you have to think about as a business owner. And it was great practice. And I still use what I learned from Cinnamon App today when I'm working with our company now. So all that to say, no failure is really a failure as long as you're able to learn from it and leverage what you've learned. So with that, I'm just going to check our chat. Again, if you have thoughts or questions throughout, feel free to drop those in, and I'll try to get to those and respond to you. Okay. So let's go to the next slide, please. So now that you know the pros and cons, this is a time to kind of do a gut check and start identifying whether bootstrapping will be a good solution for you. Here are some things to consider. The first one being, what kind of resources do you have? Do you have the resources to start building the type of business that you'd like? Now, of course, this includes financial resources, how much money you have in the bank, but it can also include other things too, like your time. How much available time do you have to donate or to contribute to building a business? What kind of infrastructure do you have? Do you already have, say like a network of people who could become potential clients? Do you already have software that you could use to start developing whatever product or service you'd like to sell? Just doing an inventory of all your available assets, financial and otherwise, is a really good first step to identifying whether bootstrapping is a viable option. The second question to ask yourself is, do you like to learn while doing and learn by doing? It's one thing to study something, say like in a course or just to read a book. It's another thing to be in the flow of work and learning as you go. It takes a quite amount of, intestinal fortitude to be willing to make a mistake and learn from it. So I think that's another thing you should probably consider as well. And again, I mean, if this isn't you, if you're like, that's scary, that's totally fine, right? We all have different tolerances for risk and for that kind of thing. But you just want to take stock of that as well. Because if you are bootstrapping, you will be learning both while you're doing and by doing as well. So the third point to consider is, what are your personal goals and values? Because that will play into your tolerance or suitability for bootstrapping as well. So if you're the type of person who really values personal freedom and control over your work, if you value that more over immediate material success, then bootstrapping might be a good alternative. Especially people who like to be a little scrappy, like to do as much as they can with little resources, live on lean margins. Those are the types of people I think who probably typically tend to gravitate towards bootstrapping, just because it does require you to like really dig in and make stuff, get as far as you can with as little resources as you have at that particular time. So the other question to ask yourself is, can your business or potentially a day job support you as your bootstrapped business grows? So again, like if you have, say like a good paying job right now that you're willing to do a little work on the side, and if you're not contractually obligated to only work for that company, then that could be a really good alternative. On the other side, maybe you have some money put away. Maybe you have a severance package from your last job. Anything that can help support you as the business grows, because again, it'll take some time for the business to start generating enough revenue that it can start supporting you. The final question to ask yourself is how well are you at delaying or deferring gratification? I've found that in our own business, we've had to sometimes just clamp down financially for months or even years, just because, we have to devote every part of our resources to the business. To me, it doesn't really feel like a sacrifice, simply because, basically, like, I really love what we do. I love working with my husband. I love, basically adding value to our clients. But for some people, it might feel more like a sacrifice. So that's another thing, to consider as well. Okay, so before I move on, if you're comfortable with this, I'd like you to just drop in the chat, based on what we've covered so far. Do you think bootstrapping would be a good fit for you, or not? And why, either way? And feel free to unmute too, if you'd like to speak.
Well, I think your cinnamon roll idea sounds fantastic. I would love one.
Thank you. Maybe I just didn't market it right. I don't know.
Yeah. Was it during COVID? Because I could see there being a big market.
No, it was before COVID. It was pre-COVID. But yeah, if we'd started it just like 2 years later, we probably would have made money hand over fist. But
Right.
Okay, well, I'll let you ponder that question. Again, feel free at any time to drop into the chat, whether or not you think bootstrapping would be a good choice. If you have questions, feel free to drop those in as well. Oh, okay. I see Amanda. Yes, we're feeling pretty scrappy, LOL. Yeah, I know, right? I totally relate to that. Yeah, and I think if you have kind of like that scrappy personality, I think that works really well for bootstrapping, because again, you just have to think about as many ways that you can leverage what you have. I've kind of realized that for me personally, I kind of enjoy living on lean margins. I like seeing, how much I can do with what little bit I have. It's kind of a challenge. So if you're up for that, yeah, definitely bootstrapping could be a really good option. So yeah, thanks for sharing your thought on that. I appreciate it. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. So if you've decided that bootstrapping might be something that you would like to try, and if you have, the resources and kind of the personality for it, here are some things you can do to make it successful. The first thing I would say, and this is something I'm actually still working on personally, is to focus on adding value to the clients you currently have, rather than trying to find a whole bunch of new clients. I think as a society, we're kind of programmed to think growth is equal to success, and that's not always the case. Especially when you're bootstrapping, when you might only have one client, or might only have one product, or maybe you have 5 people on Facebook who think your product is the best. It can be easy to look at that and say, this isn't going to work. But it's important to, just shift your focus and say, what can I do to add value to these clients, to these customers, to make them really happy? And then just repeat that. Currently, it's kind of my morning practice to think of 3 ways that I can add value to existing clients, because it gets me away from that thing of, I need more clients, I need more people, I need more stuff. And it's like, no, you want to focus again, right? You want to focus on what's small so you can scale responsibly. And when you focus on adding value to just a few people, that also helps eventually secure the growth of the business. As you get more happy customers and more happy clients, they're going to tell other people. You might even have more portfolio items to share with potential clients if you're in the kind of service business that I am. So all those things will all those things will ultimately help you grow the business. But in the right here, right now, focusing on adding value will ensure your long-term success. Another thing to consider is focusing on what I call the MVB, the minimum viable business. And this is kind of a riff on the MVP in software development, which is minimum viable product. In software, it's the idea of just get something really simple, really basic, get it working, and then iterate on it. Make it better, make it bigger, whatever. But just start with the very essence of what you're trying to do. And this is the same concept when you're bootstrapping. So let's go back to the example from earlier where like maybe you want to start a bakery. All right. And maybe you can't afford to buy a storefront and you can't afford to hire people or get an industrial kitchen. What you can do as an alternative is boil that down to the MVB. What's the minimum viable business? It might be a very small but very high quality menu of baked goods that you can bake from your home and then maybe deliver to people. Maybe take it to businesses, maybe develop an app. I don't know. Like, I didn't have much luck with that, but maybe you will. Who knows? So again, just distill it down to its most basic idea that you can start producing something today, selling a few of those things today. And then as it continues to grow, eventually, maybe you can get that industrial kitchen. Maybe you can get that storefront, but it's better to start small with what you have now rather than trying to extend yourself too far and then later have to scale back. The third point to keep in mind is that as your business grows, to constantly be investing into it. So that could be things like, buying new software or buying new materials. Of course, you want to be financially responsible. You don't want to, invest in your business when you need to pay your taxes instead. But, whenever you have a little bit of cash lying around, just maybe start developing a punch list of things that you need to invest in next. Another point to remember, another handy acronym, if you're into acronyms, is always be learning. And this isn't just reading books or articles. This can be talking to people like, hey, how do you run this business? How do you, basically, how do you solve this problem? But always be looking for opportunities that you can learn, not only how to do your core service or product well, but also how to run your business better. So again, this goes back to the idea that you basically wear all the hats, and you always have to be learning how to do all those tasks well. Another thing to keep in mind, or another tip, is to think of ways you can fully leverage the resources that you do have. So when you're bootstrapping on a very slim budget, it's really easy just to focus on the things you don't have, right? If I just had this tool, if I just had, this building, it would all work. But part of the fun of bootstrapping is you're limited to a small number of things. So you have to make the best with what you have. If you think creatively, you can find ways to leverage your existing resources in very valuable ways. For an example, in my past career life, I was a journalist, and I used that skill or those set of skills, interviewing, writing, those kinds of things. I leverage those to the maximum all the time when I'm working with clients. And that's actually one of my marketing points, is the fact that I can talk to subject matter experts, kind of extract the information I need, get helpful scenarios and what to do and what not to do points. So that way I can build that into learning experiences that ultimately lead to better learning experiences for employees. So again, anything that you have, whether it's money, past experience, past jobs, certain skills, certain tools, think creatively of all the ways you can leverage those and get the most value from them. And then finally, another really good tip is to just focus on non-financial ways to solve problems. Again, from that book that I read, Startup Review, they had a good phrase in there, which was look for return on imagination rather than return on investment. And this is actually very helpful, just as a basic business skill, because too often businesses get into the habit of just throwing money at a problem rather than trying to solve the root cause. But if you can start training yourself to look at problems creatively and think, what can I do to fix this problem without throwing money at it? That's actually going to make you a better business person. There is one more. Oh, I'm sorry.
So, Bridget, I have a question. When you talk about invest in business as you grow and making yourself a punch list, Do you have a specific method you use to prioritize those needs?
That's a really good question. I don't really have one right now. I probably should. But I would say like, prioritize the things that are most essential for you, prioritize the things that are most essential for your cash flow. So the things that will generate you money, those are the first things that I would invest in. Simply because, especially in those first couple of years when you're bootstrapping, cash flow is just so essential. So yeah, that's a great question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts? Feel free to drop them in the chat.
Yeah. Hey, this is Nick. I had a question about so talking about always be learning. What is your process for learning how to do your business better? Because I know business owners are really busy. There's not a lot of time in the day. How do you carve out time, and how do you make the most of your time in terms of learning about how to run the business?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm going to say this saying I'm not like the most consistent practitioner of this, but what I found to be a really helpful strategy, two things. First is to set aside time just in the work week to prioritize learning. So for me, that typically tends to be Friday. Like I'm kind of winding down. I don't really want to dive into any big projects, but I have some time. That's usually a good time for me to read some journal articles or to watch some YouTube videos or continue reading my book. Again, I'm not saying I'm always consistent on that, something I'm working on. But that's a strategy that works. A second one too is to see if you can find or develop a professional development network, people who are in the same line of work, or maybe just other small businesses in general, that you can meet with virtually or in person, or even asynchronously, say like on Slack or something. And just have conversations with people, or again, if it's on Slack or LinkedIn or your platform of choice. But if it's asynchronous, like not at the same time, you can actually go through and read a lot of the conversations and learn a lot. Most of the things that I have learned in terms of like pitfalls to avoid, I've learned from my own professional network, just by reading other problems people have had and saying like, oh, I don't want to have that problem. How do they fix it? So those would be my two tips for that, is to set aside time for it every week and have it be consistent. Typically at a time maybe we were not as pressured to get stuff done. And secondly, to find or even build a professional development network where you can chat with and learn from other people.
Oh, excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, any other questions? Okay, cool. So before we hit the next slide, I just want to give you one last tip that I found to be really helpful. It's not really a strategy, it's more of a mindset. And I picked this up from the author Barbara Winter. She wrote a book called Making a Living Without a Job. It was my first introduction into freelancing / bootstrapping, and it was really amazing. I would definitely recommend it. But the one phrase that I have taken from that book is this: focus on doing, being, and having the best in the present moment. Again, it's really easy to fixate on the things you don't have. It's really easy to live in the future, right? To imagine how great it's going to be in, a year or 5 years. But anything that happens in this particular moment. So this is a really good strategy for keeping yourself grounded in the present and thinking about how you can do the best, not only for your clients, but also for yourself. And that's really important too, to give to yourself as you're working on your business, to make sure that it's sustainable. It's something that you like to do and something you can do, consistently and do it well for many years.
Bridget,
Okay.
Can you tell us the name of that book one more time?
Yeah, it's called Making a Living Without a Job.
Okay, and that's by Barbara Winter.
Correct. Thank you. Okay, so in this final bit, we'll look at some resources that you can use for bootstrapping a small business. The first one I would highly recommend would be the Wyoming SBDC Network and the Community Navigator Program. So if you're here, which you are, congratulations, you're already using one of those great resources. The SBDC and the Navigator program have free webinars like this one, as well as, I believe, counseling services as well. So if you need one-on-one help, you can get that as well. The next resource I would really highly recommend is your local library. Most of what I have learned personally as a business owner, I've learned by reading books about business. The Wyoming State Library system is very robust, especially compared to other states in the Rocky Mountain West. They have a huge collection of audiobooks, ebooks, digitally. There's access to research papers and research databases through the Go Wild platform. And if you have a Wyoming library card, you can get books from any library in the state through the interlibrary loan program. So it really gives you a huge access to a very robust collection of works. You also want to keep in mind that there is the Wyoming Library to Business program. And that's a way you can get access to local experts, resources, and skills straight from your local library. And Mandy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the Wyoming Library to Business program is a spoke in the Navigator program.
That's right, it is. And we have with those business stations, not only the database and software, but also many have professional photo boxes. So if you need professional looking pictures for marketing tools, we have some podcast studios going in as well. So they are a great resource.
That's cool. That's excellent. Yeah, podcasting. That sounds like fun. It's something I've wanted to get into. So yeah, that'd be a really great resource. Awesome. Okay, another resource to consider. We spoke about this in our last webinar, I believe, but another resource you can use is open source software. And this is software that is usually offered at a lower price or for free. It's often created as kind of like a passion project from different developers. And it can be a very effective alternative to more expensive software tools like the ones in the Adobe suite. So if you're interested in learning more about open source software, you can go to the SBDC website, and under the training tab, you'll find a website that I believe will have the recording of that webinar if you want to learn more about open source software. Another resource that I've kind of alluded to before is professional networking opportunities. One of the more positive things from the pandemic was the fact that more people are kind of willing to communicate and meet online. There have been a large number of virtual networking groups that have popped up all over the place, like LinkedIn and meet.com and all kinds of places where you can meet like-minded business owners and get ideas and get tips for how to run your business. Also remember that there are in-person options too for example, like the local Chamber of Commerce usually hosts events. I believe the Navigator program hosts live events as well. Is that correct, Mandy?
We do. We attempt to as much as possible. We're statewide, so we do a lot online, but the SBDC currently does have a live event tomorrow in Casper if you happen to be in the area.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, that'll be cool. Cool. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. And if you're interested in learning more about how to network effectively, we will be doing a webinar here at 11 to 12 p.m. Mountain Time on October 18th called Networking 101 for Small Business Owners. So if networking is scary to you, no big deal. It's scary to a lot of people. If you want some strategies and tips for doing that, make sure to tune in for that webinar as well on the 18th. And the final thing that you want to consider as a resource are productivity tools. Thanks to digital technology, you can do a lot of the business tasks yourself with little to no outside help. This is a really good example of leveraging your resources effectively. These types of tools help you to manage your workload and stay on top of things in a way that you just couldn't do on your own. So some productivity tools I know that are out there include Trello, ClickUp, Monday.com, and Microsoft Planner. We currently use ClickUp, and I've been very happy with it. It helps me manage all of our internal business tasks, as well as all of our projects for external clients. It has a nice little daily view for me, so I know exactly what I need to do that day. Very helpful. If you have any other resources that you know of that you'd like to share, feel free to drop those in the chat too. Okay. All right. Next slide, please.
I have a question, Bridget. This is Amanda. Amanda from Jackson Hole Mobile Massage, not the other Amanda. My question is, do you know much about Slack? It sounded like you mentioned it, and it's been coming up a lot to us, and just wondering if you have any feedback on it.
Yeah, excellent. That's a great question. Yes, I'm part of several Slack communities, mostly again, just for professional development. It's a really good tool for internal communication. So if you have a larger business and you want to communicate with employees, you can do that. Probably for bootstrapping, you'd probably be doing it more, though, I'd imagine, for, again, like networking with people. So the way it's set up is you have channels, and channels are kind of confusing, but it's basically like a little digital space where you can have conversations around a specific topic. So if you want to create a channel for, I don't know, snags and brags is one that's on one of the professional networks I'm on, where you just want to share something good that happened, or you've got a problem you need to help solve, you put it in the snags and brags channel. And it's just, it's kind of a way to organize communication between a large group of people. I have never had any problems with it. And I think it's a really good entry point if you're not familiar with a lot of kind of more virtual asynchronous communication, just because the user interface is very clean and it's pretty easy to figure out. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. I'm seeing some things here. Okay, so Devin suggested Airtable. Yeah, I've heard good things about Airtable too, as a productivity tool. I've never used it, but I know other people who do, and they're pretty happy with it. Yeah, and Basecamp. Yeah, Basecamp could be another one too. I, again, don't have any experience with that one, but I've heard good things as well. Okay, so that's all that I had today. Are there any thoughts or questions or any other resources or ideas that you wanted to share today?
I'm not seeing anything in the chat right now.
Okay.
Well,
All right. Oh, yeah.
Oh, Bridget, just one last thing. I really wanted to say I really liked the thinking of every day, thinking about 3 ways to add value to your current clients. I think, a great piece of advice. I do that occasionally, but I should probably make it more of a focused thing, right? Every day, be thinking about that.
Yeah. And, honestly, that's so much of business management. I mean, at least for me, is just finding those little things you do every day. I'm sure there are lots of quotes that apply to this, but the things you do every day make a huge impact, much bigger than the big things you do just once in a while. So yeah, just building those into your routine is very helpful. Yeah, and just thinking about ways to add value has really helped me focus a lot on how I can, focus on the clients I currently have. I will say that kind of idea came from a book I'm currently reading, and I'll drop it in the chat. It's called Business of One. And who's it by? I'll have to find that. Got it here somewhere. Oh, Paul Jarvis. And this is actually available through the Wyoming State Library digital collection through the Libby app. So you can check that out and read it. But that's been a huge help for me. Just, again, thinking small, working small, but having a big impact. Okay, so I see I see a comment from Devin. I think the biggest challenge for small businesses is staying accountable to their agendas. Small chunks are so powerful. 15 minutes, 2 times a day can make huge gains on projects. Yeah, right? Definitely. Yeah, definitely. So like when you're saying like staying accountable to their agendas, do you mean like, hitting deadlines, or just kind of staying on track with what you're trying to achieve? If you can provide some clarity, that'd be cool.
Right. Well, with a variety of different tasks, even sometimes just the basics, like keeping up on your social media posts, or tackling a program plan that you're writing, or writing that job description for the person that you should have really hired 3 weeks ago. There can be potentially, it could just be overwhelming. And I think it can be very misleading to think that you have to tackle all of these things at once. But I know as a small business owner and someone with a lot of projects on my plate, trying to stick to my agenda and stop snoozing those alarms that keep going off can be one of my biggest challenges.
Yeah, I hear you. Totally. One of the things I do in ClickUp is I schedule tasks. I schedule them in specific chunks. So like, okay, I'm doing this from this hour and this hour and stuff like that. And then I try to hold myself accountable to getting it done at that time, or at least within an hour or so. Another tool that they have that I really like is called a daily lineup. And it's where you can just basically pin your most important tasks. And for me, part of a successful day is making sure all my pinned, lineup tasks are completed. If I can look at that and see if all of them are done, I'm like, yay, it's a win,
Interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, even just 15 minutes twice a day. Sometimes that's all the attention I have because I'm just pinging from one thing to the other. And if I'm making progress, if I'm moving it forward, then that's success, right?
Absolutely. We need those successes to keep us going.
Yes, exactly. Small wins, right?
Bridget, how did you get your background to not look crazy when you talk with your hands?
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Honestly, I'm in a white room. We just moved and this room is white and there's just white wall behind me. You can do the same thing if you have like a green screen or just a green piece of fabric. If you pin it to the wall, that's what my husband does. Just pin it to the wall behind you. It works like a charm. But yeah, I just have white walls. So good question.
It looks good. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
All right.
So, yeah.
Well, that concludes today's webinar. Bridget, thank you so much for being here with us. We always enjoy having you. It's always so much information. And so we're really thankful that you continue to come back and share your knowledge with us. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like to remind everyone, if you are a Spanish speaker, we have a Spanish speaking marketing for small businesses webinar this coming Thursday at 11. And then also we will have Bridget back with us again on October 4th for growing your business remotely. Since we are all scattered, this is a very timely topic. So we're excited for that one as well. And then we also have a survey. If you wouldn't mind taking that quick, short survey following this, we would be very grateful. Otherwise, we will see everyone back here with Bridget October 4th. Thank you.
Thank you.